Earlier today, we got one of the longest and what I would actually consider one of the best Todd Howard interviews ever. In this, he discusses all kinds of things: Starfield features, the Fallout TV show, a new Bethesda mobile game, and honestly, probably the most we have ever actually heard about the Elder Scrolls 6, although it's still not much. This interview was done with Lex Friedman. It's available in full on his YouTube channel and is nearly 3 hours in length. And now for some of you, this is just a great listen, put it on in the background and take it all in, but I assume some of you just kind of wanted the gaming details out of this, and that's what I'm here to share. Starting off with Starfield, Todd Howard mentions how one of the unique aspects of Bethesda games is their worlds are almost like one big simulation. Even when you can't see some of the other NPCs, they're still active and doing things. In a lot of other games, when you can't see the NPCs, they're largely just turned off, but not in Bethesda games. For example, in Bethesda games, oftentimes NPCs will maintain their schedules. They'll continue walking around even when you can't see them. And it's mentioned how with future games, and that likely means Starfield, Bethesda plans to take this even a bit further.
How do these things exist? Take like a faction in the world. What is their role in the world? As opposed to just their role is for the player to join it, go through a bunch of quests and become the head of the faction. Think a little bit deeper about the simulation and what would the Mages Guild be doing in a fantasy world, or the Fighters Guild be doing in a fantasy world, versus just sign up, do quests, get gold.
This has been one of those aspects of Starfield I've suspected will get an upgrade for a while, a more intelligent and active world unfolding around us, and even more advanced AI. And it sounds like that is the plan. We can go off to some planet somewhere, do our own thing, and factions will continue to develop and evolve without us. And Todd Howard continues on to describe how he thinks we're going to see more AI and neural networks in gaming in the years to come, and that's going to include Bethesda Game Studios games.
Right, but if we go back to it being reactive, some of that bot stuff, it's incredible. It's then translating that into voice.
Although speaking of planets, they also touch on those. It's described that similar to how things worked in Daggerfall, in Starfield, lots of things outside of cities will be procedurally generated and not handcrafted. The first thing Bethesda did during the development of Starfield was create a system to generate planets.
And so we did find a way, we came up with a way, had prototyped of building tiles, like large tiles of landscape, the way we would usually build them. We kind of generate them offline, hand do some things, and end up with these very realistic looking tiles of landscape, and then built a system that wraps those around a planet and blends them all together.
And further, once you have this, you could kind of just create as many planets as you want. You put in a number, hit enter, and it'll create all of those planets for you. It's actually relatively simple. But the reason Bethesda is going with 1,000 planets for Starfield is so that it's a more controllable number, and they can actually do some things with those planets and systems and add traits and other details to them. Each planet will have its own name, as well as systems in Starfield will have a level associated with them. This will be that familiar video game indicator as to the difficulty of that area. Todd Howard mentions one system having a level 40. Although in the game there's going to be 100 different systems in general, which who knows, maybe that means there'll be up to 100 levels for those systems. But even just looking back at that gameplay trailer, we could see how some of the planets and systems will have certain characteristics assigned to them. It sounds like from a broader level, Bethesda is doing more specific things to keep things more interesting overall.
There was a big design kind of problem to solve in terms of, well, what's fun about landing on a planet where there's potentially nothing, because there's a lot of planets and moons, if you kind of, right, in reality, that, well, there's nothing on them except resources. And so we spent a lot of time figuring out, okay, let's just lean in on that can be a lonely experience, as long as we tell the player, here's what's there, here are the resources that are there, go find them. But I equate it to that moment of, we said about listening to the wind go and watching the sunset. And I do think there's a certain beauty to landing on a strange planet, being somewhat the only person there, building an outpost. And we are modeling all of the systems, because that's how we like to do things. So you can watch whatever that gas giant or moon, it will rotate and go, and sunrise, sunset, and all of those things that you would expect. And it's it's all really happening.
I think this quote's pretty interesting. One theory I've had with Starfield is it's almost like it's two games stuck together. We know that Starfield will have an absolutely absurd amount of dialogue, the most dialogue in any Bethesda game, but it's also going to have an immense amount of exploration, base building, and even resource gathering components. We'll be able to settle and build on planets, and I mean, who knows, maybe even conquer different star systems. But it seems like a lot of that's going to be optional, and that's where I get into that two games stuck together theory, where on one side you have the almost base building aspects and colonization, building up resources, etc. But then the other side, you're going to have this massive story with an absolutely absurd amount of dialogue. Many people will probably play both of these, but I'm sure for many of you out there, you'll play more of one or the other, depending on your preferences with games. Like if you hate base building games, just never actually play the base building side of Starfield and stick to the dialogue heavy side. And they mentioned here how the character interaction aspects are getting expanded in Starfield. Specifically, we hear about some new details that will work with companions. It's described how there'll be a bunch of companions in Starfield, but 4 will feature even more complex relationships.
We wanted one where, okay, we can be in a relationship and we've committed to each other in some way, but I just did something that really made you angry. Yeah. And as opposed to just drifting out of that status, you're in a temporary, I don't like what you did state.
Wow, so some greater degree of complexity in the relationship with a companion.
A little bit.
A little bit. Are we
I
talking about?
I don't want to oversell that part, but
sure.
My point is, I think those things where you meet a character in a game and you do spend time with them, a companion in a game, and it leads to romance, you know, myself and others, and I find a lot of players, those moments are really, really impactful and special to them because they did put in the time.
So I think this is pretty cool. It basically is a more lifelike system, where instead of just being a linear like to dislike opinion with a companion, now in Starfield there'll be a degree of temporary displeasure based on your present actions, or even actions you completed recently. It also seems like Todd Howard is just a big fan of romance in games in general. I wouldn't be shocked if this is expanded in Starfield. I wouldn't be shocked if Starfield took a page out of CDPR's book with how CDPR handled romance in Cyberpunk 2077. For a lot of people, that was one of their favorite aspects of the game. But even in a broader sense, voice work is being done differently in Starfield. With all past games by Bethesda, voice work was completed towards the end of development. But now at Starfield, it's being done during the entire development process and actually being completed over 3 to 4 years. And it's mentioned how some of the voices and characters are being reworked along the way, or even characters being scrapped entirely if the voice work isn't right. It seems like in general, Bethesda is just putting a lot more attention into interpersonal relationships and interactions with Starfield, which is definitely really exciting. There's going to be robots in this world. Vasco, of course, will be one of our companions, and he will feature a full personality, but most of the other robots are just going to be there for utility.
So we use them for utility? We actually dialed them back, because if you think about, well, you know a lot about this. If you were to chart the future, you would say robots would have a much bigger role in our future than we are presenting. But that was a tone thing. So most of our robots are there as utility robots, and there are some combat ones as well as enemies.
So it's a deeply human world.
Very much, yes.
In terms of tone.
This is a pretty interesting choice to me. AI in particular, as of late, has become a huge thing, a huge discussion point, but also a more relevant part of many people's lives. And you have to imagine hundreds of years in the future, when Starfield takes place, it'll be an even larger part of people's lives, especially in space travel. But for one reason or another, it sounds like Bethesda isn't going the route of super intelligent AI in Starfield. Although, at least for me personally, I still do hope there's at least one quest where you're dealing with an advanced AI and even perhaps questioning the nature of our reality. Starfield overall can be viewed as an extension of how things are today with space travel, that in a grounded sci-fi game. And space travel is going to be considered dangerous in Starfield, but only from a tonal perspective and not from a gameplay perspective.
It has a tone of there's some effort involved, and we've dialed it back as we've been making the game, whereas we used to run out of fuel. You jump and get stranded, which on paper was it's a great moment when you get stranded. You have to press this beacon and you don't know who's going to come. Mm-hmm. Turns out that's not it just stops your game. We found you'd be playing the game and I ran out of fuel. Okay, I guess I'll just wander these planets trying to mine for fuel so I can get back to what I was doing. Mm-hmm. A hardcore survival mode, that's the kind of thing you would do. Maybe we'll do it in the future. But it's more of like a tone, how they build their ships. Do they have all the right things for safety?
We've heard a bit about this cut feature in the past, and at the time I saw a ton of comments about people asking for it to be re-implemented as a hardcore mode feature. But seemingly, at least as of right now, the current build of Starfield, there isn't a hardcore mode. Although, please add it, Todd. I feel like a lot of people, myself included, think that is the best way to experience Fallout 4. Although in Starfield, environmental threats will be a thing.
We do get into environmental things on the planets, in your spacesuit. Obviously, there are a lot of different spacesuits and buffs for, the gases or the toxicity or the temperature on various planets.
This seems like yet another gameplay element that can really tie into colony building. Perhaps some of the far out planets have the rarest resources, but also dangerous gases that make it so you can't actually just go there. You'll have to build up a colony on one of the closer planets first, generate enough resources to be able to make a spacesuit that will actually let you go there, and then when you get to that far planet, you could finally build the thing you've been trying to build this whole time. This is the base building game progression formula that basically leads to you playing 10 hours straight and not even realizing it. And I definitely would love to have that in Starfield, as I am a massive fan of base building games. Also a pretty awesome detail, ships will actually take off from starports as we are exploring those cities, so we'll just see this happening in the background without our interaction. They talk a bit about the decision to delay Starfield, and really how Todd Howard felt it was the right thing to do.
We've done it in the past where we can get it done. We believe we can. And so you're fighting that personal belief that you can get something done. We've reached a point where on Starfield where it was pretty clear to us, even though you want to say you can get it done, that the risk involved with that to the fans, to the game, to the team, to the company, we're part of Xbox now, to everybody, was we should really move it and give it the time it needs.
I found that quote pretty interesting. I have a suspicion that Microsoft and really Xbox played a pretty large role in why Starfield was delayed. Even in this interview, Todd Howard also talks about how Starfield is being positioned as a system seller for Xbox. This is something that's new for Bethesda and is adding a lot of pressure onto them. And taking these quotes together, it just sounds like it was these outside factors that motivated Bethesda/Todd Howard to announce and actually enact that delay. Where perhaps if they weren't owned by Microsoft or some of these circumstances were different, Todd Howard would have been fine with the level of bugginess with this game, and we would have had yet another buggy Bethesda release. I mean, basically every single game they've had, especially in the modern era, has been a buggy release to some degree, although there's definitely levels to it. Although it does also seem like Starfield may have a cross-progression system, at least if you're playing on Game Pass, so you could save on PC and load that save on console and vice versa. Shifting away from Starfield, Todd Howard confirms they are working on a new mobile game, and he is in love with it. There's no other details shared, just that it's in production and he's in love with it, and it seems like this could be Spy Team. Spy Team's a long-held trademark by Bethesda, and it was actually one confirmed by a leaker on Reset Era. This wasn't just some random leaker, he actually leaked things correctly about Starfield, like ship flight, and also was confirmed by other people like Jason Schreier to be legit. And that person basically said that Spy Team was a passion project for Todd Howard, but currently put on hold. So it's not really clear what this game is, but Todd Howard loves it, and it's a mobile game that's been in progress to some degree for a couple of years now, although it definitely seems like that development was on and off. We also get a bit of talk about the Elder Scrolls 6.
So blink once if you know when Elder Scrolls 6 is coming out.
Okay. I have a vague idea.
He mentions how if he could go back in time, he wouldn't let there be this large of a gap between releases between Elder Scrolls games, but also how people are now playing Bethesda games for such a long time, and that will inevitably happen with the Elder Scrolls 6, so now it's actually a part of how they architect that game. It's not really clear what that means, like how are they developing the Elder Scrolls 6 or even Starfield differently with the knowledge that it'll be the only entry in that franchise for a while, probably a decade for both of these games, but it's pretty interesting to hear that from a high level, they are planning something for the Elder Scrolls 6 around this. And I think one of the things that they'll be further investing to into the future is mods, and paid mods will be coming back.
We've hired a large number of modders that are now professionals. We want to support the people who are doing it on their own so they can be professionals on their own. And so someone who's going to do that, that's almost like it takes them a long time. It's more than a hobby. And we're always looking at ways that we can make it like, hey, they can turn a career into it because it's just awesome.
Todd Howard has had a similar line about helping modders turn modding into more of a career or just something more substantial in general during numerous interviews during the past year, to the point where I just think there's something in the works at Bethesda. And honestly, it just makes a ton of sense to have some kind of paid mod system. Skyrim has a ridiculous amount of players, and as of right now, Bethesda just isn't really monetizing those players. Having some kind of microtransaction to buy over time that is incorporated with modders just makes a ton of sense. Skyrim's 11 years old and still is one of the most played games on both Steam and Xbox. That's crazy. And Bethesda actually has the format to fix this. Microsoft has done it already with Minecraft. There's a system known as the Marketplace, where you could basically buy things with mine coins. These are going to be things on the store. Some are free, but a lot of them are going to be created by members of the community, and then Microsoft gets a cut as well as those creators get a cut. And although, again, even though nothing has been confirmed, with how often this is getting talked about, I wouldn't be shocked if we see this getting implemented to Fallout 4 and Skyrim as almost a Creation Club 2.0 in the future, but really their long-term plan is to have it implemented with Starfield and the Elder Scrolls 6 as being a long-term way to make money off those games. But Todd Howard also mentions that when they're about halfway done with making one game, they actually know several details about the next game they're going to make. And this has happened with the Elder Scrolls 6 already.
So take Elder Scrolls 6. We forgot where it's set. What's the tone? What are the big features? We discussed the beginning of the game, which we've had for a very long time.
Where's it set again?
Yep. So we've already done a take on the music for Elder Scrolls 6.
So you can sit there with the concept art and the music, and you can feel it.
No, the music we put in the teaser for it. This was 2018. We've taken that further, obviously.
So though the Elder Scrolls 6 is still a ways away, it definitely seems like many fundamentals about this game are already done at Bethesda. There's also some talk about the Fallout TV show. Todd Howard mentions how he was stunned by some of the things being done for this show, in a positive way obviously, but also how they're going to be protagonists in the plural, and there's a major attention to detail and really just a general obsession by the showrunners.
I was stunned. I don't want to spoil it, but when people see it, I think you'll just be like, wow. And for this, it was, hey, let's do something that exists in the world of Fallout. It's not retelling a game story. It's basically, an area of the map, and let's tell a story here that fits in the world that we have built, doesn't, break any of the rules, can reference things in the games, but isn't a retelling of the games that exists in the same world, but is its own unique thing.
I am incredibly excited for the Fallout TV show. On one hand, because I could finally be one of those YouTubers who just reacts to things, but also if you haven't seen the leaked set photos, it just really seems like they're paying attention to the source material like Todd Howard describes, and overall the show just looks like it's going to be really cool and a lot of fun. We also got a mention of the Indiana Jones game, which we haven't heard about in a while. Todd Howard is executive producing this game, but it's being made by Machine Games. The reason for this is Todd Howard is a massive Indiana Jones fan, I think made evident by this clip.
And I just love everything. I love everything about it.
What was the opening? Is this when
What? It's the temple, and then the ball rolls and tries to crush him.
Oh, that's the opening.
That's the opening of Raiders. Yeah, he steals the idol.
I think you're deeply offended.
What's the opening of Raiders?
But overall, Todd Howard describes how this game's going to be a love letter to Indiana Jones. If you're a fan of the franchise, you're going to love this. They start talking about whether it's going to be open world or more action-adventure, and Todd Howard describes how the game's very intentionally going to be a mashup of different things, and how he believes Machine Games is the perfect fit to make this one, and how he thinks Machine Games may even be a better fit than his own team. And largely that was the interview. There actually is a ton more than that. It was almost 3 hours in length, so there was a ton of other personal things. It was one of my favorite Todd Howard interviews because he just had a lot of time to flesh out his words. There's many stories, many personal anecdotes, and a lot of things just about how he got started at Bethesda, and even some odd and fun facts about Todd Howard. So definitely I recommend giving it a listen. I'll have a link to the full thing down below if you're interested. Otherwise, as always, again, I thank you all for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.